Here with me today is a special guest, Jonathan Shechter. He's a managing partner at Shechter. We're here to discuss future of technology, artificial intelligence, how in general technology and automation is going to be affecting the lives of everyone, everybody's business, lifestyle. Here with me today is a special guest, Jonathan Shechter. He's a managing partner at Shechter, a boutique law firm out here in New York City with offices in New York and LA. Thank you so much for joining me, John.
Thank you for having me. Beautiful new nano offices.
Correct.
Yes.
We're here to discuss future of technology, artificial intelligence, and how in general technology and automation is going to be affecting the lives of everyone, everybody's business, lifestyle. We'd love your input, your feedback.
Should only be a 10-hour conversation.
It only should be a 10-hour conversation.
We'll do it quickly. Yeah.
Please introduce yourself, your firm. What are you guys doing, your specialty?
I would love to, and it's good to be back in sunny New York for a change. We are a boutique law firm. We're primarily based in New York. It's a firm that I started with my partner almost 10 years ago now. Very, very boutique operation, having come from bigger firms in New York. I was doing a lot of IPO work and public company work and really enjoying it, but really enjoying building relationships with my clients beyond the scope of just the legal vacuum. So as we talked about before the show, personal connections and branding and whatnot, I had the opportunity to start a firm. You know, my daughter was 2 months old. The timing couldn't have been any worse. I still decided to do it because I guess risk-taking to a measured degree is something that I still enjoy doing. But we primarily started serving very few customers, private and public. And over the span of that time, we grew and built out affiliations with other firms in international countries and built our practice, built a presence in the US. From there, built a little bit of a more international client base, although we are still a US firm. We do have clients anywhere from Israel to Australia, Europe, and whatnot. So we've grown, and today we're basically doing corporate transactional work for the most part. So what does that mean? It means working with clients that range all the way from very early stage companies all the way through publicly traded companies that are listed on, let's say, the NASDAQ exchange. And then everything that comes in between. So forming a company, speaking to a couple of partners who want to finally incorporate their business and start their operations by raising some seed capital. A company that's looking to protect its intellectual property. A company that's thinking about doing a merger with another company. A company that's looking to sell or exit its position to another company. A company that's looking to go public. So we kind of deal with all these different things. They span the scope of what companies go through in a life cycle. So I kind of look at companies as life cycle ventures. So you start, maybe you grow, maybe you stop, and you're reborn in another kind of form, or you merge and then you become another entity and you go public, and then all of a sudden your makeup changes entirely. So we kind of deal with all those aspects. We're based just a few blocks from your new offices here.
Where would you say your current focus is? Are you guys more enterprise or more startup based?
Yeah, I would say we're probably today, I want to say we're almost 50-50. We have some broker-dealer fund work that we're also involved with that takes up, I guess, part of that pie chart. But for the most part, we're dealing with about 50% public company work and 50% private company work. And that private company work looks very different. Some of it is companies that have gone through a Series A, and so they're more mature companies, and some of them are very early stage companies where we're really mentoring, the founders and helping them grow. I mean, I think maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later today, but some of the new regulations that are helping companies raise capital. So it's just become so much more accessible that today, raising capital has become a very different animal than it was even as early as 5 years ago.
Is it easier or harder?
I think it's become a lot easier. Well, let's put it this way. Let me sharpen that answer. It's still challenging to raise capital. You've known this, right? And I don't think that the actual aspect of raising the capital has become easier, but I think that the platforms and the regulations that allow you to raise capital have become a lot more accessible to early stage companies and founders. So we've talked a little bit about this, right? But the Jobs Act and some of the regulations that came into effect several years ago that allow for what's known as crowdfunding on a basis that's different than just what Kickstarter and Indiegogo allowed probably 6-7 years I don't want to go too far, maybe 5-6 years ago, which really only allowed you to enjoy rewards and prizes from basically donating your company and contributing your money to projects or companies. Today, you're allowed to invest small amounts of money into these companies, which is known as equity crowdfunding. And so these regulations through a lot of platforms like WeFunder and Start Engine, and there's just a bunch of them. But today, putting up these campaigns is not a heavy lift. It's feasible. You still need to meet the regulations. You still need to provide disclosure and financial statements, but the burdens aren't what they used to be for more traditional forms of raising capital. So I think it's become certainly easier through these regulations to raise capital.
It's been a very interesting turn where the crowdsourcing of everything is becoming popular. Yeah. Not only raising money, but also you have crowdsourced services.
Yeah.
A ton of marketplaces coming, raising from different aspects in different industries. But I think it's good because that's creating a global change, and it's giving people more opportunity. Even from crowdfunding, you have opportunities to invest into projects and different companies that you never could invest in the past.
Yeah. To your point, I mean, the echo chamber is huge, where you're allowed to basically test the waters, not only from a financial standpoint, which is actually a regulatory mechanism under Reg A+, where you're allowed to basically go to the community and say, hey, if I decide to pursue this project or this company, would you be interested in investing? And that's actually accessible to do now, where you're able to get certain commitments from the crowd, right, from the community as a whole, and say, okay, if I'm going to put my time, my effort, my money, my human resources, my manpower, all of these buckets into this project, would you be interested in investing? And a lot of the platforms today are allowing you to do that, so that you don't spin your wheels, right, and go and waste resources and months to put all these.
Do you need to be an accredited investor to?
For some, you need to be accredited, and for others, you don't. For what's known as general solicitation, so this is basically the 506c offerings, the ones where you go on a platform and you generally solicit, meaning you can basically publicize your capital raise to everybody and anybody, but you're only allowed to take in money from accredited investors. So the very simple definition of accredited investors is basically a net worth of $1 million plus, but there's other different criteria that you can meet through annual income, but we don't need to get into it. But generally, only for 506c offerings, only accredited investors are allowed to invest into those offerings, and the companies themselves have to take pretty significant steps to make sure that whoever's investing is accredited. But other forms, such as Reg A+, and then Regulation CF, anybody can invest. Now, there's limits on how much you can invest, and there's different scenarios about that, but that's almost less important than the general idea that today, if you're a company, a technology company, a medical device company, whatever it is, and you want to do a Reg CF, a regulation crowdfunding offering, you can go and raise up to $1 million in any 12-month period. And that's pretty huge. And a lot of companies, I think, to your point, they're using it as a marketing tool as well, right? It's not just, let me go get that capital, but now I have a platform, I've got exposure, I've got my marketing video that I've invested into, I can post that on my social media pages, I can basically put my message out into the world. And I think that does a lot, not only from the capital raise standpoint, but then you go and you send that to your major distributor, your marketing channels, whoever you want to see this, and you say, hey, look, not only am I raising some capital, but look at all these other great things that I'm doing.
And how does that compare to raising money from traditional venture capital firms?
Yeah, well,
are you sacrificing the advice and the mentorship that comes with VCs, or?
Could be pursued as a potential negative, right? Because a lot of these VC raises, and you've had conversations with venture capitalists, so you know this, a big asset of what venture capitalists get to offer is, these are people who have gone through it. These are successful people who have specific experience in different areas, and they're able to not only invest that money, but they're also able to give you the guidance, advisory board seats, opening doors, mentorship, all those boxes that we've talked about so many times. There's different negatives that I would say. If I had to pick a couple of the primary negatives for venture capital, I would probably say, number one, it's very difficult to get into the doors of venture capital.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The threshold is high, and that's great, right? Because you have this creme de la creme that get to go through it, and you get to, I guess effectively weed through, right, a lot of the companies that maybe don't make the cut. But just getting through the door is super challenging. The due diligence you have to undergo through there is pretty rigorous, right? But probably what I would characterize as one of the primary weaknesses with venture capitalists is just that the capital is very expensive. Because the venture capital firm is offering so much beyond just the dollars, right? It's also this idea that you get to say, you know, X venture capitalist invested into me, that means, you know, I've made it. Reputation, right?
Absolutely.
They take a big piece of the pie. So the valuations that you're going to get are probably a lot lower with a venture capital firm than they would be for potentially other money that you get to raise. So it's expensive capital. You give up a lot of your cap table for VC money, but there's a lot of tremendous benefits that you get in return.
How's that market going? The blockchain, we'll touch a little bit upon it. There was a big hype. I'm a fan of blockchain technology, but you know, I don't think people figured out the right approach to utilizing the tech.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see the application, right? I see the application. It's without a doubt, I think, in its infancy. So I think there's still a lot to come in terms of the various applications for blockchain, with anything from medical records, real estate. I mean, the applications are very broad. I don't know if it's our generation that's going to get the full benefit of blockchain, or our kids, where effectively, you know, everything will be. I mean, I read about this restaurant in Plano, Texas, that now when you go and you order your meal, you should have your phone, because using blockchain, you can actually see where the steak that you're eating came from, what's its origin, how it reached you. So the idea being, I think the restaurant's intention is a closer connection to your food, right? I think that's the general idea, where there's an element of social good that's involved there for people that are comfortable utilizing social good in steakhouses. I'm sure there's a overlap there, right? But the idea is, it's a day-to-day application. Right? If you go and you sit down, you order your meal, and you want to know, where did my food come from? Now there's a way of knowing that. So even there, you have restaurants and technology. The restaurant is becoming technological, right?
I was expecting that manufacturing would be very much into blockchain. Just, you know, particularly luxury manufacturing. You know, there's so many knockoffs. You know, think about how Rolex has been, you know, spending so many years trying to protect their market from knockoffs. I mean, if you remember back in the day when Canal Street used to sell tons of knockoffs, they would have bulldozers come in and just straight in the middle of a daylight run over fakes, right? Just destroy products. So, you know, Rolex tracks every single watch. You know, jewelry manufacturers, diamond, you know, producers, luxury bags. You know, think of Louis Vuitton, of, you know, how many knockoffs there are out there. Yeah. Like, you would think that they would start incorporating blockchain into their product.
That's a great point.
That's where we saw, I've seen when Bitcoin was kind of skyrocketing, it seemed like this is where it was going. There's a couple of wine companies that started tracking, you know, their bottles of wine, and I thought it had great potential. Yeah. But I think because of how the market treated blockchain in reference to cryptocurrency, they just created a really bad name for that industry. And I think you're right. I don't think we'll get the benefit from the tech. I think you'll have a few winners that are going to come out of the ashes in the next 10 years, and we'll start kind of paving the way for other technology companies to use the tech. I think it's a mindset. It's a matter of mindset. Instead of trying to get rich quick because this new technology allows you to, you know, how many ICOs came out and then just died? How many ICOs were fraudulent? There's a ton of cases where people lost a lot of money because they were naive and they believed into that get rich quick schemes. And mind you, there's a ton of people that took advantage of it happily. So I think technology needs to be looked at carefully and utilized properly, not from a perspective of technology, but more of a perspective of how does it benefit our livelihoods, how does it benefit businesses, how does it benefit people in general.
Yeah.
Which
That's a great point.
kind of in parallel where I want to jump in is, the same, not argument, but the same concerns are happening with artificial intelligence, where AI is taking a very deep position in our everyday life, in everything we're doing. Thankfully, AI is not, doesn't have the bad rap of the blockchain, but people do have concerns, right? People have concerns about losing jobs, about controlling AI, about regulations. My personal opinion, and this is just an opinion, is AI is as good as the people that wrote it. So AI is a tool. It's just another piece of tech. It's very powerful, and it can do a lot of incredible things. But if you, just like any other tool, if you put it in the hands of the wrong people, they'll utilize it for things they shouldn't be utilizing. So there needs to be, there's a ton of talk about regulation of AI and controlling of it. I agree with. My only dilemma is that people that regulate it don't have a clue about it. So that becomes a problem. Because, regulation needs to come from on a governmental level.
Yeah.
And if, respectfully, they're politicians. They're not technically, aware. They don't understand the capacity of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has multiple subsets. There's different ways of accomplishing, results. You have things like computer vision versus natural language processing versus machine learning versus deep learning. These are different subsets, and they're utilized in different ways. As an example, China started using computer vision to track all its citizens, right? So now they can monitor everything that everyone does, including their shopping habits, their livelihood. So the big brother is now completely watching it.
How does that get initiated? Is that something that
they're a communistic country, so they have the
But
government.
is it something
has
that it's like an ID or a fingerprint in the U.S.?
Facial recognition, facial and body language recognition.
So you get basically at a certain point in time, you get scanned, and then that gets.
Not at all. So everybody, CCTV, right? The surveillance cameras are pretty broad. They're in every store. They're in every place that you go to. Every public place has systems that monitor you. In US, we're lucky with privacy laws, that data stays with the owner of the building, right, or the owner of the facility. In China, they have to report everything to the government. So the government basically has full access to every single network. They control the networks and they can access the networks. So they've developed AI that sits on top of their network and tracks every single person and classifies them. And they can tell. And they're actually starting to push the boundaries a little bit because they want to incentivize their public to be good. So if they see that you're a person that, buys groceries that are healthy, you do exercise, you helped somebody, they're tracking every single step that you're making, and they're giving you points for it. They're actually building a credit system based on your behaviors. So if you're a person who's buying alcohol, that's a negative. If you're buying cigarettes, that's a negative. If you're getting into fights with somebody on the street, everything is tracked and they view it, and the artificial intelligence is fast enough and pretty robust to tell the difference between people's behaviors and actually track you across the board, right? They'll recognize you and they'll assign you a default ID, and that ID will follow you for the rest of your life.
What does that translate into? So I'm good at the end of
So
40
you
years.
have a credit system, you have a point system. You actually,
Applied to what? What does that look like?
if you need to
know?
get a loan, if you need to get,
Really?
want to rent a
Into
car.
your general makeup.
It's very much, if you ever
Rating,
seen the
wow.
show called The Black Mirror,
Yeah.
it's very much like that.
Oh my
It's
God.
kind of scary, but that's that's AI in somebody's hands that shouldn't be. You know, these are the wrong hands that are controlling.
I think you need to look at it, right? The idea is just like it would be unreasonable to look at an issue like global warming or climate change, right? It would be unreasonable to suggest that the U.S. on a federal level, right, on a national governmental level, can, in and of itself, solve or direct where climate change is going. It's a global issue.
The problem is, it's not a problem, it's a catch-22. It's a gift and a curse. AI is becoming a utility. It's basically becoming like electricity. And it's forecasted in the next 2 to 3 years, artificial intelligence will be in almost everything that we touch. Smart devices, cars, phones, you know, computers. I mean, if you use Gmail, you'll see Gmail is now autofilling replies for you.
Sure.
You know, Siri's getting a little bit smarter.
Yeah.
People are, you know, utilizing, you know, Alexa and Google Home more and more. So voice is becoming very strong, but to support voice, you need AI to run it, right? And because the context, you and I can ask for the same thing from this gadget, but we'll ask for it differently. And the system has to understand the difference between what you're asking, what I'm asking, but we're asking the same thing. The output has to be the same. So because AI is becoming a utility, it's very hard to control. You know, how do you tell somebody in China, like, you know, don't write, you know, code that's infringing on personal privacy?
Right.
Or how do you tell, you know, somebody in Russia, how do you control somebody in Russia that, oh, yeah, don't try to monetize on AI, build it for good.
Right.
You can't. So I think, but that's a global issue that I don't know who, you know, how we're going to be facing with. But on a national level, you know, I wanna touch a little bit on, you know, some of the concerns that I've been hearing and reading. Most people's concerns about AI, because they're not familiar with what AI can do and what it is in general. Their biggest concern is job loss, and, you know, what did they do? And so I wanted to kind of paint a little bit of a picture for everybody of where the future is going from a technology side. Things are becoming more and more automated. They're becoming automated for our benefit. Now, you have, you know, companies that are working on robotic kitchens. You have smart refrigerators. There's a huge industry shift in self-driving cars. You know, all the devices are going to start interacting with one another. You have a ton of delivery services. You know, you can order groceries online. You can order anything and everything online can be delivered to you, right? And so as these things grow and scale, they're eventually going to start interacting with one another. So if you think about, you know, just from your home perspective, you're going to tell your assistant, your digital assistant, that you want to have a particular meal for dinner, and your digital assistant will check your smart fridge for the ingredients if they're available or not. And whatever missing ingredients, the system will automatically send a request to your nearest local grocery shop, you know, that will deliver these groceries to you and hand it off to your whatever little robot assistant that you'll have at home, that will then deliver it to your robotic kitchen that will prep this meal.
Right.
This will all happen
Yeah.
by your one single request. Right. So, and we're not that far from it. All of these parts currently exist independently from one another. We just haven't reached the level where these parts talk to each other. And we're only, I don't know, I don't want to throw numbers, but my assumption is that we're anywhere between 7 to 10 years away from that automation, right? Where obviously not on a mass scale, but it will exist in more successful homes, I would say, that can afford such technology, right? So now picture this: you didn't have to go shopping, you didn't have to rush home to cook a meal. You came home and everything's done.
The benefits are
all
clear.
the benefits. You freed up so much time. This is just one simple example of you've maybe freed up 3-4 hours of your time.
When I look at AI and I think of benefits, and let's say in a vacuum, I'm looking independently of any ethical, security, regulatory issues at all, and I see what are the benefits that are available from that. To me, the potential of what humans could do with time that's otherwise been reserved because of AI is phenomenal, right? Even look at an industry such as healthcare, right? The idea of, let's say, imaging scans, right? You have a CT, an MRI, an X-ray that needs to be reviewed. It could take 3, 4, 5 doctors, and I'm sure most people have this experience personally, where you're dealing with a scan and something got missed, and a second opinion, a third opinion, and somebody goes, oh look, that was missed. Wow, we had to go through months of agony and different doctors getting different opinions. The idea of taking a process like that is fraught with human error and being able to now funnel it through a technology that in milliseconds is able to identify something that otherwise human eyes are so challenged, right? That's phenomenal, but that's not the only benefit. The benefit I probably see the biggest is, to your point, this idea that now that time has been, and I don't look at it as a job loss scenario, right? I look at it as that time by these doctors can now be spent on something that robotics and artificial intelligence probably can't do, right? This idea of human contact, bedside manners, being able to direct humans through the various medical channels and discussions that a technology today at least can. That's immense. And now you have a doctor that's not, stressed and fraught with this idea of reviewing scans, and their eyes are probably tired, and they just get to deal with practicing medicine on a level that's with humans the way it's intended to be done. So to your point, I see this benefit of being able to open up time and allow people to do what they're best at doing is a major plus of artificial intelligence.
100% agree. And that's the point, is that will jobs be lost? Yes, but that's natural with any progression, right? But you are actually opening doors for people to be able to do bigger, better things. It's the same thing when elevators became automated. Yes, there's a bunch of people that lost, the elevator operators lost their jobs because somebody was able to automate, the basic up and down principle.
Yes.
So, the time, there's two points to this. One, people have an opportunity to now do something better, right? AI, robotics, automation, mechanics, all of this is meant to help us do things better and faster. I love a perfect example from the basics is doing laundry. Only 30, 40 years ago, my mom was doing laundry by hand. We didn't have machines, we didn't have anything. It was a full day event of very laborious process, right? And so now that process is shrunk down to maybe 6-7 minutes of putting it in the laundry, putting in the detergent, pushing the button and walking away and coming back and putting it in the dryer and pushing a button and walking away, right? How much that process alone, right, on a very basic level, how much better everybody's lives improved. So,
but I don't think they had the same concerns of washing machines building legs and taking over your house and
the taking over your house and hurting your family.
That's the doomsday scenario
which is very far away. Robots
you
are
watch Boston Dynamic videos and it seems today, right? It seems imminent.
Boston Dynamics is doing an incredible job with robots. I love them, but they're nowhere near. They figured out the mechanics. They figured out how to make fluency within a robot. but the level where robots become a danger to us, it's very far away. The level where robots can do what we do is very far away. The holding, the grabbing, the twisting, the turning, they're still in such a baby stage that we shouldn't be worried about. But the free time, the question becomes, what do people do with free time? You know, now I believe there's a little bit of an epidemic with time and how it's being used. For years, we've been allocating our free time to rest, right? So you spend 8-10 hours a day working. You're exhausted, you come home, you turn on the TV, you have a meal, you have a drink. Everybody's got different habits, right? But now imagine with all the automation and everything that's coming into our lives, eventually we won't have to work as much. Eventually, the work we're doing today will take half the time. So if your working day is now 4 hours instead of 8, what do you do with the rest of your time?
Right.
And the unfortunate fact is, if you look at a lot of people that, lose jobs or get out of a job or have additional free time, it's being spent binge watching Netflix, consuming too much alcohol, overeating, all the unhealthy habits instead of trying to self-educate, improve their physique, get a little bit inspired, experience the world. So there's a lot of entertainment and the content that revolves around entertainment that's being produced that forces you to be a couch potato. And this is my concern with automation, with all the benefits that are going to come from having all these amazing features, right? Just by saying, hey, make me a pot roast, and you just say it to your phone, Siri, I want a pot roast for dinner, and when you get home, it's done.
Right.
You've done nothing.
Right.
And by the way, you probably got driven on an automated car home that you no longer need to own a car, right? You don't need to own anything.
Yeah.
You just need to push a button or speak and things will get done.
Yeah.
The time freed up, I don't think we're conditioned to use the time for anything else other than indulging. And I think that awareness factor is missing. And people need to start learning and visualizing. What would you do with more free time? How would you use it? How would you spend it? Right? Because I think the fear of people that are afraid of losing jobs is the association of, I gotta work really hard for 8 hours, and then I get to enjoy a few hours however way I want to. But now a robot's doing my job for 8 hours and I have nothing to do.
Yeah.
Well, you have all this time to now learn, educate, elevate, and be better.
I think you framed that really well. I mean, I don't know if I think the concern is certainly economic with job losses, where it's literally this one for one, I lose my job, a robot takes my job, now I have no salary and I can't put food on the table. There's that extreme example, right? I think the picture you paint of this idea that today people are essentially consumers of content, right? This idea that we have to constantly digest and bring in content into our lives on a nonstop basis that's definitely an epidemic on a whole different level, right? I mean, on my commute into the city today, there were options for the drive, which weren't available before, right? You can talk on the phone with friends or business. You can listen to music and relax. I chose what many people choose, which is podcasting, right? I mean, I love this idea that today from technology, I have this ability to basically make what I hope to be smart decisions and effective use of time of learning about some subject, hearing an intelligent conversation, and I get to do that basically about anything in the world, from anywhere in the world, which is phenomenal. But all you have to do is have, a 7-year-old at home, and you see that the attention span is effectively non-existent. This idea of boredom, I think, again, it's a very non-business conversation, right? But it's a conversation I think every parent deals with, is this idea that, the next generation has a problem to face. Beyond climate change, beyond wars, beyond everything, there's this idea of, this idea that today, I think people constantly expect amusement and some form of being turned on by something. Whatever your medium of choice is, of Instagrams or Twitters or whatever it is, this idea of getting constantly reinforced by likes or some bizarre person commenting on something you did and your life being public to the world.
And we're back. Okay, John, I'd like some of your advice for companies that are primarily startups. Okay, there's a transition that happens between when you go from just being a product or creating a product to actually becoming a company, right? And that process can take 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. There's a lot of moving parts. Generally you have startup founders that maybe one person or partner, a couple of guys that come together and come up with a really cool product. But then and this is my personal belief, is that why 90% of the startups fail is that majority of these startup owners and entrepreneurs simply don't have the experience, the knowledge how to build a business, build a company, grow the company. There's a lot of moving parts. I remember when I was starting out, Nano Web Group, which is over 11 years ago, I had this vision that while I'm a top performer at my company that I work for, and if I go and do this just for myself, I'm going to be an overnight success, right? In which I've painstakingly learned that an overnight success takes 10 years, okay, at least. So, and we've consulted a lot of entrepreneurs and startup owners on, from the positioning side, from the technology side, from the branding side, the user experience side, but a very strong consideration needs to be done on the side of a business structure and growth. When you start onboarding employees, when you start, taking on bigger payroll and the responsibilities, the liabilities, everything that comes with it. I'd love, you're an expert in this field. You've helped a number of our clients, and I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that process. So when we're transitioning from a product to becoming a company, what does that process look like? What do you recommend? Some advice that you could give to people.
Yeah, I think any founder or founders that recognize at an early stage that not only is it critical to focus on the product, obviously, which is the most important, but it's also important to focus on your foundation and building a strong foundation that lets your product develop. They're 10 steps ahead of all the others. A lot of founders in that specific respect have certain blinders on, and probably they should, right? These are the technology guys, these are the thinkers, these are not the guys focused on lawyers and accountants and tax professionals. These are guys focused on what is the coolest product I could possibly develop, and how could I make this so different and breaking barriers, and that's what we love about them, and that's what we want them to focus on. But unfortunately, especially if you're a founder and you don't have partners that are able to help you think about these things, it can only go so far, right? But that process, I think, it's one of the more exciting processes, and I think that's basically the first life cycle that I kind of spoke about before, companies going through different life cycles. That's kind of the first cycle, right? That's the building structure development, where you take this idea and you put a frame around it and you build a little bit of a house, right? So I think essentially maybe we can go through the building blocks. Maybe that'll be one way of kind of helping think about it. So the first part the companies need to think about is incorporation. In other words, a founder with a product, or founders, need to think about this idea of putting a corporate structure behind the product that will own it. And there's a few reasons you want to do that. One of the primary reasons is liability. So effectively, whenever somebody operates a business not as a person, but as a company, then they get the benefit of limited liability, meaning that if there is a problem with the product or something happens or someone, God forbid, sues you or whatever the case may be, you're shielded from liability by virtue of a corporate shield. So that's one aspect that you want to think about. Another aspect that you need to think about is this idea that essentially when you have a corporation or an entity behind your product, you have this ability to raise capital into that company that owns the product. And it's something that needs to be thought about because obviously for development and growth and go-to-market strategies and marketing and all these other reasons people raise capital, an investor is probably not going to write a check to Jonathan because Jonathan wants to build a product, right? Or has a product. But maybe I'll get a check and he will have ownership or she will have ownership in my company if I do have a corporation behind it and then that corporation is able to develop and build the product. There's also tax benefits that a lot of people don't think about when you run corporations. Simple things like opening a bank account for a product, right? You want to have a corporation that owns it. So this idea of corporate structuring and formation is kind of the 101, right? Of starting your life cycle as a company. So the first thing we would typically do is we would look at, okay, who owns these things? Who are the partner or partners involved? If there's multiple partners, many times what's overlooked is this idea that you need to have essentially a partnership agreement when founders are coming together and developing a company. And the reason you want to do it is because of all of the overlooked issues and all of the things that nobody ever likes to talk about, right? This idea that partnership is effectively a marriage. You've seen this, right? I'm sure with many clients where the partners are effectively marrying for purposes of developing this product, the product being the baby. So there's going to be disputes, there's going to be things that people don't necessarily agree upon. There's going to be unforeseen circumstances and events in the future that are going to come up. So you want to have a partnership agreement to be able to govern these things so that when they do come up, a fight or some other scenario doesn't come up. So you want to think about what happens if, well, let's say I want to devote more time to another project. Or what happens if I want to sell part of my interest to somebody else? Can they do that? Maybe you can, maybe you can't, right? That's what the process of developing a partnership agreement is for. The worst of it all, somebody passes away, someone dies. What happens to the interests? Where do they go? So all these things that nobody ever likes to talk about, but that it's just best to get it on the table. That's what the partnership agreement is there for. And obviously all the things that many people probably heard about, like drag along and tag along and rights of first refusal, especially between the partners. All these issues come up and get thought about. So we'll build a corporate structure. One of the first things we'll probably do is some partnership agreement between the partners. Then all of the administrative aspect. You need to give a face and a governance aspect to the company. So who is the management? That needs to be appointed. Who's the board of directors? That needs to be appointed. For bank account purposes, you need to have board resolutions. All the housekeeping stuff kind of gets put together. And then you're typically in a position where you have a pretty basic corporate structure. You know who manages it, you know who needs to sign off on things, the partners have an agreement between themselves, the company is formed. So far, so good. So that's kind of phase one. The second phase that typically comes into play is either this idea of raising capital or employees. And once you have employees, you get into issues of, well, are they going to have stock options? Are they not going to have stock options? Do you have an advisory board that needs to get issued stock options? So we need to start thinking about capitalization. And basically what that means is, how many shares are we going to issue of our company? Who gets what share ownership? Does anybody get special rights, like voting rights? Does anybody get more votes than anybody else?
What's the advantage of stock options, just for some people that don't know?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Stock options are effectively the ability to give other people the ability to buy stock of the company for a certain period of time at a certain price. So it's like me telling you, okay, you get to buy shares of Jonathan. I'm going to give you that right, and you're going to have that right for a period of 4 years. After 4 years, the right expires, and you get to buy my stock at $10 a share. Okay. So basically, what we've done is we've kind of fixed the point, and a lot of times, what will happen is people will apply vesting. Mm-hmm. So basically, you can't just buy everything at once. Right. But over 4 years, I'm going to give you the right to essentially, in let's say 25% a year, you're going to get a right to buy my shares at a certain price.
And this incentivizes me to be part of your company, so yes, that I have more skin in the game, I would say.
That's a great term. That's a great way of putting it. You have skin in the game, and you hopefully...
Great way to retain employees.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't cost me any money to give you stock options. It's free for me. The idea being that you'll work with me for these 4 years, and by working with me, you'll probably be paid a salary if you're an employee, but you'll also have these options as a sweetener, with the idea being that you're gonna feel ownership. And this concept of ownership is I think minimized a bit too much, but this idea that you already own part of my company by virtue of having these options. So you're going to work better, you'll represent us better, you'll put in more hours, and beyond just these ideas of incentivizing you, you'll feel better. You'll feel like you are a part of this company, so it's a win-win for everybody involved, right? But you gotta plan it out. So you need to create a stock option plan, and you need to figure out how much of your cap table is gonna be comprised of stock options and how much is actually gonna be shares that are issued.
At what stage should one think about? So you
One should
put
think
it
about
in
it
phase
pretty
two.
early. Yeah, pretty early. The reason being, so stock option plans typically require shareholder consent. So if you have a lot of shareholders that are coming into your company at a very early stage, you're going to need to reach back out to them most likely at a certain point to get approval for a stock option plan. So it's nice to get that early on. And the second reason is you might need it sooner than you think. So it's always nice to be able to say, we have a plan that's already made available to us, and whenever we need to tap into it, we can. It's just this idea of being prepared and being ready. The more you can get out of the way early on in the process, the more your head is just free of it later on down the line. So one of this idea of incorporation, this idea is that you have limited liability, you have tax benefits, you have an entity that owns the product and the intellectual property and all of the assets that go into this, and you now have the ability to say, okay, now this entity is going to market to raise capital. Oh, this entity is now going to market, we're gonna retain some incredible talent and people to help us, and if we need to incentivize them because we're low on capital, we'll issue them equity of our company, or we'll issue them stock options. So it's all kind of part of that building phase. And then this other idea that, so if now it is time to raise capital, well, now we have a way of going about doing it, right? So now we do all the things that you help your clients with along the way beyond what Nano typically does, right? But this idea that let's develop this marketing plan, let's do the homework, let's do the industry research, let's figure out the weak points, the strong points, let's figure out a presentation that can now help us take this to an investor and secure capital. So all of that will get prepared together with what's typically known as a term sheet, which shows the investor, okay, here's what we're looking to do. We're looking to raise $500,000, $2.5 million, $5 million, whatever it is. Here's our marketing plan, here's our term sheet, here's what the capitalization of the company looks like today, here's our management, here's our board, we have these number of employees, we have this much money on hand, here's what we see as our biggest weak links, here's our biggest strong points, and our competitive advantage, which you guys often help clients with, your clients put together. And then that whole process of negotiation with an investor typically starts. So that's kind of the very
Are you guys involved generally? You guys are
very
involved
actively,
in the...
Very actively we're involved. So oftentimes we'll help a company decide whether they want to raise, let's say, money through equity or through debt. Those are options, right? A company that doesn't want to give up any of its cap table and is soon to be or is soon to be making some sales revenues may want to raise debt instead of equity because they're able to secure, let's say, the chunk of money that they need today and then be able to repay it over whatever the length of the note is without having to give up any equity, right? So debt might be a great option for a company like that. On the other hand, a very early stage startup company with very heavy IP that isn't set to monetize until years down the line, but the IP is worth a lot, may want to raise equity. This idea being that they will have to give up part of their ownership. There is no doubt about that. But on the other hand, there's no loans to repay. Let's say the investor is even some form of a strategic investor and is able to open some doors or is otherwise able to give great advice or let's say serve as an advisory board member if he or she is well known in the industry and able to kind of help and guide the company along. Well, equity might be a great idea there. And then we help companies raise capital, so we know the terms pretty well of what's market today. So we can tell them, hey, listen, you should be raising equity with warrants or a convertible note and here's what we suggest in terms of stock price or things along those lines. We don't make the decisions, but we can give our guidance.
So I want to change a little bit of gears. Thank you very much. First of all, it's very, very insightful. I think this is a lot of information that a lot of entrepreneurs just are not aware of, or if they are aware, they just need reinforcement. I'd like to pick your brain a little bit, just your views on, change is happening, right? It's very noticeable change, economically, technologically, financially. A lot of things are moving at a very fast pace. What is your view on technology and where it's going? And how do you think it'll impact, let's talk about, say businesses in general. I don't put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it doesn't put me on the spot, but I think it's a broad question. I mean, we see it every day, right? Even in my profession, or even the legal profession. I mean, today, you had talked about AI before, right? If I were to ignore AI, even in my business, right? Running a law firm and providing legal advice, I mean, that would be pretty silly of me. And I think that I'll go so far as to say that I think even law schools today, if they're failing to make students aware of this idea that this is going to play a factor in their lives as professionals, I think that's a certain degree of irresponsibility. We don't have robots that are going to be providing legal advice, but I think probably the most obvious form of AI that's going to be impacting us is NLPs, right? This idea that there's so much content out there and so much data that it can be pretty simple for a technology to, you'd referenced an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement before. NDAs tend to be, for the most part, documents that have a similar structure, a similar nature to them, right? I can certainly see it happening where you would have AI running, an NDA through it for purposes of review that in 10 seconds can probably do a decent job and hit on things that are wrong or hit on things that are missing, which is also incredibly important, and kind of doing that aspect. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take over the legal profession, and I'm not worried about it, but it's going to play a role. I mean, when I was in law school, I don't want to age myself, but when I was in law school, I was doing research on LexisNexis, right? And before that, students were doing research on textbooks or libraries. So the next phase, I mean, it's not going to be, sorry, Lexis, right? It's not going to be LexisNexis, right? It's going to be AI that's developing these technologies, and it's going to be us having to somehow incorporate it into our profession in a way that is helping clients rather than hurting them. You're always going to need a second set of eyes. You're always going to need people to do deals because companies are made up of people, and people can't deal with robots. People deal with people. It is what it is. So deals, transactions are always going to have human beings incorporated in them, but technology is becoming more and more involved, at least in our profession, I think. Even from, automation, client billing matters, things like that, it's just there. Other things like blockchain, that's certainly going to be involved, I think. From earlier, you had talked about, the bad things that had come out of the quote crypto boom that happened a couple of years ago. I think there's a differentiation that needs to be made between cryptocurrency and then blockchain, which are oftentimes kind of bundled in a way that may be unfair to blockchain or too unfair to crypto. But yeah, there was a ton of frauds because it came on really quickly and people didn't understand it, and a lot of people still don't understand it. I certainly don't claim to understand everything about it, but the basics of it we understand. And I think more and more blockchain is going to play roles in these companies down the line, but it's a part of our lives. It is what it is. And, we have to either adopt it in a way that helps us spend more time on valuable things, like you had said earlier, or we ignore it and
we'll get consumed by it.
Yeah.
You can't ignore it.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of people not ignoring technology and growth and impact. It is going to change a lot of things. Just one of the things we're trying to do is not only create good tech, but we want to create tech that's recyclable. Tech that we can reapply to other places, recustomize, repersonalize, and drive it down. And so this is an example of a product that eventually will become a company. So I'm actually very happy that the breakdown that you gave, that when we bring on board a co-founder to run it as a separate company, there's a process that they'll have to follow as well. So one of the questions that we had come in was, and particularly relevant to legal. What is one type of advice or request that you get over and over, and that you have to constantly repeat? Like what one thing that you would advise to keep in mind that's very helpful?
So in other words, what's one question or piece of advice I can give clients? I'd probably say one of the biggest things that gets overlooked, maybe we can approach it in that direction rather than a question, but one of the things that often gets overlooked and that we usually end up having a problem with is that a lot of companies, and this goes from, it doesn't really pertain to public companies that much, because from there, typically the systems, the controls and procedures are in place already. But for private companies, especially the smaller ones, the biggest overall piece I would say that gets overlooked is this idea of corporate governance. So what does that basically mean? A couple of founders or a small management team, they're moving along, they're developing their product, they're dealing with distributors, they're dealing with retailers, they're dealing with investors. Maybe there's a seed round that was done and Uncle Bob invested, and they're just plugging away at their business. The problem is that oftentimes they don't put in corporate governance that effectively shows that the company approved what is happening along the way. So companies, as a living, breathing creature, which it is, needs to have a system in place that reflects that what's happening is being approved by management teams and board of directors. So for example, a new chief technology officer gets appointed by the board of directors. Fantastic. Is it just Yuri and Jonathan sitting in a room going, okay, let's bring him on. I think he's good. What do you think? Yeah, it works for me. Let's bring him on. That's fine, but there should be that board consent or some consent that approves that so that we can put it in the minutes of the corporation. Okay? Same for issuing stock, very important, or raising capital. Why is this important? It's basically the roadmap of the company. It's the story of the company, where whenever you need it down the road, whether it's an investor due diligence or for any other purpose, even a potential bad reason, right? Like a lawsuit that comes on board from an investor that says, hey, I invested $50,000 and I was supposed to get X stock. My subscription agreement is wrong. Well, we can go back to the story and we can take a look and see what happened so that, number one, we can clear it up with you, hopefully amicably. And number two, it can protect us if we, the worst of the worst happens and there's a lawsuit. So I would say the most overlooked thing is this idea of maintaining this corporate governance. It's a fancy word for saying paper trail.
So what does that process look like? How do you recommend that?
It's so simple, right? The idea is just time and resources, which oftentimes the reason it doesn't get adhered to is because founders and management teams are just too busy. They've got blinders on for, we got to reach our next phase, right? But this idea that when material things happen, there's a board consent that approves what happens. It gets signed by the board and it gets filed with a minute.
So like a journal.
Yeah, it's not a journal. It's literally called a board consent. So it's a piece of paper that basically says the board approves XYZ, whatever XYZ happens to be, bringing on a new senior employee, issuing shares to somebody, approving the stock option plan, all the things that we kind of talked about before, filing for a patent even, right? All of that should be approved in a consent that gets filed. Lawyer has it on file. We probably have thousands of them on file, right?
And if the company doesn't have a board, what do you recommend?
So companies almost always have a board, right? Corporations basically have to have boards. So that's one of the things we talked about at the beginning, which is that's one of the first things we implement, which is a board of directors, which is basically the overlooking group of people that oversee what's going on with the company. The management deals with day-to-day things. Sign a deal here, distributorship agreement here, hey, pursue this marketing plan. The board of directors is the one that overlooks the biggest things. Right. Appointing new board members, appointing senior management teams, a shift in the direction of the company, issuing shares. It's kind of the more material things. And this board should have consents for major things that are going on with the company.
And everything that gets recorded gets stored in the corporate book?
Recorded and stored, absolutely, so that when it comes time that an investor wants to invest capital and says, all right, I want to do this, I want to make sure your housekeeping's in order, send me a Dropbox with all your board consents.
Any digital software online, SaaS platforms that give you the...
Absolutely. There's I'm sure plenty of online platforms that help you just fill in things pretty quickly. Right. But yeah, we provide these, I would say, on a monthly basis, where an investor or somebody that's doing due diligence wants to take a look under the hood and say, let's make sure we got everything in order. Can you show me the approval for this transaction? So we just make sure that it's done. Now, you can save yourself in the sense that if this was all overlooked, down the line, you could go back and retroactively approve all these things, but then you're dealing with things like, that are going to take a bunch of time and having to go back and approving them, and it's, it can frustrate processes. Listen, every client has my cell phone, and I don't like this idea of, someone calling me and I go, it's them, it's a terrible feeling. We just like clients that are, respectful and are fun to work with. This doesn't have to be a dry process. We like everybody we work with, thankfully. And that could be simply because of the way we approach how we garner clients, right? So this idea of referrals, and so everybody comes through somebody that we like already. So there's a certain vetting process that happens because of that. So that's always good.
I'm a big fan of building the right support system within, not only family, but also within the partners and networks and who you surround yourself with. Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. And the more people you try to help, the more people help you. And you have to surround yourself with people that are trying to do better.
Yeah.
And if you surround yourself with the right people, you naturally grow.
Yeah. Well, I once heard this saying that you're the average of the 5 people that you're closest to.
Correct.
And I think that's incredibly profound and accurate. So if you're gonna have people around you that are, negative and saying this doesn't work and this is terrible and you shouldn't do that, it's just gonna impact. Everybody needs to constantly monitor, I think, who they're around, and make sure that the relationships stay personal and not virtual, right? You're not Facebook friends, and it'll be all right.
So share a couple of sources of inspiration and knowledge that you draw from.
In terms of inspiration, it comes from a lot of different places. It's hard for me to pinpoint. I get a lot of I don't watch news that much. I don't think that that's really relevant these days. I think today you can get a lot of amazing news through, your own personal pick and choice, a la carte resources. I listen to a lot of podcasts that range everywhere from philosophy to, the simple commentary things on life. So Sam Harris is wonderful for me, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, I listen to those guys a lot. And I love the guests and I love the information that you can kind of get from there, because the content varies so much from anywhere from, a philosophist to a mathematician to an astronomer to, a CEO of a public company. So you can kind of get a lot of different vantage points. So for kind of general information in my life and what I kind of plug into, they also have great energy. I kind of like to go there. In terms of professional resource, a lot of my legal education comes from CLEs and my partner, who keeps amazing track of everything. But today, with all these different platforms that are doing crowdfunding regulations and whatnot, you get so much information from there that's really good. So that's really nice to get. I read Medium pretty often, which is really helpful for me. And I'd probably say that's I try not to read too much, get lost in social media. So I steer away from that as much as I can. Yeah. Excellent.
How do people get in touch with you if they needed to get in touch?
So we have our website, which is pretty simple to find. It's fullyschechter.com. You guys can put the spelling up there on so it doesn't confuse anybody. Otherwise, we keep a pretty active LinkedIn account, and we try to limit our social media to LinkedIn these days. We have a blog that we put up every so often that has some good information, a newsletter that goes up if you sign up for us through our website. So that's the best way.
Excellent.
Contact us. Yeah.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Really appreciate your feedback, your input.
Pleasure.
It's been real pleasure.
My pleasure, sir.
Thank you for coming
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.